Hello class. In this video I'm going to go over how to make Illustrator object look like it might be an art marker. And actually I think I might do this in two videos. So in this one I'm going to be doing sort of the background imagery in the trees, which is more of the sketchy look, because that'll be different than this looks sort of like wood floors in here, but also looks like what might happen if you overlap your marker a little bit, but or do it in a different way with your hand. And so they really use two different techniques. So I think it's two different videos. So in this one, it's more this green back here, the green here, the sky, what's happening in the trees are all sort of the same thing, or done very similarly with the same technique. So I'm going to just jump to this file, which I just have two white squares. I rounded the corners, no big deal, just to show you how to do the different things. So the first thing I'm going to do, of course, is I'm just going to start with a base color. So I'm going to do this back one first, and I have a color saved here, sort of matching that green, but this works for any color, so that the exact color doesn't matter. And I'm going to turn the line off, because usually my lines come from CAD. Right? So I'm going to come here now, like any texture, a lot of this thing is going to happen to the appearances by adding a lot of functions down here. So actually the base screen, I'm going to work my way up, I think, here. The base screen is just going to be the base screen. I'm not even going to do anything to it. So I'm just going to duplicate it like here. And I'm going to have two that are identical sitting on top of each other. Actually, for the second one, I'm going to keep the same color. In fact, I'll generally keep the same color for all of this. So I'm going to but I am going to apply an effect, my first effect. So I'm going to go to Effects, I'm going to go to Stylize, and I go to Scribble, which is the foundation of a lot of these. I should have changed my opacities first so we could have seen what was happening, but so be it. We'll go ahead and do this. And so in this case, I'm going to set my angle to 0. Now, any of these settings, I should mention, that you do, they could really be different depending on your particular style, on the scale of your drawing, and many other factors. But this is what I've got doing. So I'm going to change this to negative 0.06. Change this to 0.4. 0.04. That's what I want that to be, actually. My width, I think 0.1 will work. 5%, 1%. I'm going to do 0.19 down here. And I should mention it. I've done this before, so I know what my numbers are that are going to look good for this particular scale that I'm doing. What I also need to do this is I need to change the opacity. I'm going to change the opacity to 40. And I'm going to change this, I'm going to change the opacity of this fill, the blending mode, to multiply. And when I do that, we'll get the first sense of scribbles on here of what this might be marker. Now this is not enough. It doesn't quite look right yet, because there's still a couple steps we have to apply. But this is what it looks like. And so I should have done this first, then you can set the scribbles, because the scribble function will change based on any number of factors. But anyway, to get a good marker, I find that you usually need a base color, a scribble, and then you need at least one more scribble on top of that. So I'm just going to come down to this fill and literally just duplicate the whole thing. Now, since I duplicated it, it just got a little bit darker, but I need to tweak some of the settings to make it look a little more random. And so actually the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to come back here. I'm going to change the opacity, because I want these settings to also be slightly different. So I'm going to change this one to 50%, and I'm just going to make this one normal, actually, to give it that subtle, much more subtle feel. We see how it changed its subtlety, but still there's a lot of overlap, because I also need to change the scribble. So I'm going to keep this still at 0, because I want the orientation to be the same, but I'm going to change these numbers around. I'm going to set this one to 0. Here, I'm going to keep that the same, keep that the same, keep the same, keep the same, and then I'll change. So basically all these were the same, but I want to change the spacing so it becomes a little more random looking. So I'll go 2.5 and 0.03 here. You can sort of see in the background, it's starting to give it a little more of sort of randomness feel. So I'll say OK. And so this is the basics of the marker, the most simplest you can do. When you want to change it up, you simply change these functions. Now I want to show you a couple more tweaks to this on this one above that I have here. So I want to copy all of this. Of course, I can use my graphic styles to make replicating it much easier. So I'm gonna click on here, click on this, and I just made a second green one. I could have copied the object if I wanted to. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to come to the second one just to change colors, and I'm going to change it to a blue color, so more like the sky. I'm just going to go and set all these. Again, I have preloaded this color into mine, but it doesn't matter because this works for any color. Now with that, it's the exact same technique, but it's blue. And so it sort of has a marker feel, but with this overlap, it still doesn't quite feel right. And the reason why is because markers, if you use colors on top of each other, they can bleed through each other and produce a third color. And so we can do that too. If we just come down to the whole, this top object here, I'm going to change the whole opacity blending mode to multiply, and we see once I do that, this doesn't change because it's over white, and I could have done it to this one, it just didn't matter. But where they overlap, and now it starts to take on an additive color technique just like art markers do, and so I think that produces a useful technique. Alternatively, you could actually mix and match colors in here as well, because sometimes the same object wants to have multiple colors, but sometimes you do it like this. And so there is lots of variations. I'm going to show you one more tweak to this blue object, which is to say, what do you do if, like in the trees I showed, the marker doesn't necessarily cover the entire object, and sometimes to highlight, you don't want the marker to cover up the entire object, to highlight or shadow or something like that. And so we can take this, and I'm gonna copy another blue fill right on top of this object here, and I'm going to do the same sorts of things. I'll start by reducing the opacity and making this one I think I want it to be multiply, so I'll set that up right now. And I'm going to change the scribble just because it always sort of needs to change. The key step is still a step away after scribble, but we'll come here to 0.08. Actually make that negative 0.08. As I said, this was all trial and error that I did before the video. It's not like I know these numbers without trial and error, so go ahead and you give things a try as you need to. I just pre-did it so that way I wouldn't waste time playing with all these slide rules. So I think that'll be okay. We can see right now that didn't do exactly what I said, because we need to add one more effect to this fill, and I'm going to do a little free distort, which is under effects in free distort. And we see this, we got the shape, this marker shape that's taking up the entire object. And what I can do is I can basically sort of pull this around. Let's say I'm going to give a shade to this corner down in this lower left hand side here. So I'll just kind of come in, maybe pull that down a little bit, maybe pull this in a little bit, whatever you think looks good. And I'll simply do that and say okay, and you can see now I've shaded one edge of that. So you can use that to give sort of three-dimensional techniques, add some detail to your drawing. And again, if you want to edit any of these, you just re-click over here in the appearance. I actually think this needs to be pulled in further. Something like that produces slightly nicer shade. So there really is lots and lots of variation, and the key to using a marker-like technique, at least in here, is two levels of scribble with some opacity and multiply on some of them. I purposely went over the edges in this one. You don't necessarily have to do that if you think that's too messy. So there's lots of options to tweak this further to be able to get images that look like this. I will go over the other kind of marker technique I have in that drawing next, so it should follow in here. But again, if you have any suggestions of things that you want to see if I can make in Illustrator or Photoshop, tell me or send me a link, put it in the comments or whatever. All right, good luck drawing.